But I appreciate very much the invitation to get to be here and get to be with you and talk about these things. We're going to be talking about three individuals who saw Jesus after the resurrection. And if you want to go to, like John 20, John 20 and 21 is where we're going to be spending basically our time. We're going to be looking at stories in those chapters and focusing primarily on Mary, Thomas, and Peter, because in each one of their stories, I think we get a little bit of something about faith. We get something about reliability of who Jesus is and how he's recorded in Scripture. And so these are very, very important things for today, where we live in a world that seems like it's getting more pluralized all the time. And it seems like Christianity is getting more marginalized all the time, at least in the West, right? At least in America and especially in Europe. Of course, that's been going on for hundreds of years in Europe. One of the flagship examples is the French Revolution, where they just tried to remove everything of any kind of Christian nature. So the Virgin Mary was replaced by Lady Liberty, who is still on French currency. You had the Cathedral of Notre Dame turned into a Temple of Reason, which I thought it was weird because they still kept the word temple, but it was just devoted to like the mind or something. And so you had that was maybe like the best example of trying to just strip away the Christian identity completely that France had. But we see that in America as well, where the picture of Jesus is overturned or renovated or re-envisioned as something else, and Christianity is portrayed in very negative ways and in the media and all that. But what I'd like to do is look at these three individuals and what one very significant story has to tell us about each one of them and their faith and the faith that you and I are called to have. So if we go and look at Jesus' appearance to Mary Magdalene in John chapter 20, it says, starting in verse 11, Mary stood weeping outside the tomb, and as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb. She saw two angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." Having said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing, but did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And then he said these things to her. All right, so there are a lot of things that we see in the Gospels that you would never find in fiction. And sometimes that's what the Gospels are called. They're, historical fiction or legends or myths or that kind of thing. So I did a sort of like a video podcast with a fellow who's a friend, preacher dad in Texas, a couple of months ago, I think it's been now. And it was basically the title of the show was "The Bible is Not Mythology." And so I went through in this video, and he and I talked back and forth for a little while, and I just said, well, this is why the Bible's not mythology. And I laid out all the characteristics of what mythology is. It was a little bit academic, so we're not really going to go into that this morning. But I said, here's all the qualities of what mythology is, because you don't get to just say legend, fiction, mythology, fable, Bible, and they're all the same thing. Those are all very, very different things. And that goes unappreciated by people in our world today. Because what you usually see is those things used interchangeably, and what they mean is it's just all false, right? And the thing is, though, and I don't know if this is just, the product of an education system that doesn't inform people very well, about this, but they're not interchangeable at all. No two of those things are interchangeable, right, at all. And so we just simply live in a culture where people don't understand that. And with Mary and Thomas and Peter and all these stories that we're going to see, what you're going to find out is when you read through this, there are details that you don't get in just fiction, at least ancient writing, right? And this stuff you don't get in mythology. So one of the ways that I sometimes put it is when you look at mythology, it doesn't really get into details. It doesn't get into geographic details, really. It'll say this happened here or there just because. I've got two now, thank you. Maybe I need it. But it only gives you the details that you need to know to kind of like get the setting. It doesn't really go into much more than that. Whereas with the Bible, you get the kind of details that you expect out of an eyewitness account. All right? So when, and we'll talk about this, a little bit later, but when Peter sees Jesus, it gives details like, he didn't have his mantle on, didn't have his clothes on, maybe just was stripped down just to the basic necessities to be modest, right? Just maybe a loincloth. Well, he wraps his mantle around him and he jumps into the water and he swims 100 yards. Well, why does that matter that it was 100 yards out, right? Why does it matter that they caught 153 fish? Why does it matter what he was wearing? Right? Those details are absolutely irrelevant for mythology, but they're very important for eyewitness accounts because it meant somebody remembered those details, right? Why does it matter who was first at the tomb? Why does it matter who outran who, right? Those are details that you expect to be reported by eyewitnesses, by people who experienced those events. Well, when we look at this kind of thing, the burial cloth of Jesus, right? Why does it matter that the Gospels record that the burial cloth was folded up? Why does that matter? It doesn't if it's mythology, because it actually happened, right? It was actual historical detail that an eyewitness reported. Okay, so these are eyewitness accounts, not fanciful legends and myths and that kind of thing. C.S. Lewis had this to say about the Bible. He said, either this is reportage, pretty close to the facts, or else some unknown writer in the 2nd century, without known predecessors or successors, suddenly anticipated the whole technique of modern novelistic, realistic narrative. If it is untrue, it must be narrative of that kind. The reader who doesn't see this has simply not learned how to read. All right? So what he's saying here is when you're looking at the Bible and you're looking at the narratives and the details in those narratives, what people will say is, oh, it's just historical fiction. It's just fictional stuff. But remember, C.S. Lewis wasn't just an apologist. That's how we usually know him, like the Lord, Liar, Lunatic, the trilemma, like if you've ever heard of that. C.S. Lewis came up with that. So we usually think of him as an apologist, but he was an expert in literature. And so he basically says, in this one book, he says, I've read poetry, I've read mythology, I've read legends, I've read literature of all kinds. And whatever the Bible is, it's not that. It's not any of those things because it reports real, genuine historical eyewitness accounts. And so what he's saying here is, if you say the Bible is historical fiction, what you're asking me to believe is that the biblical writers invented something hundreds of years before anybody else got to it, wrote this, and then it was promptly forgotten for hundreds of years until it was reinvented again? Or does it just simply make more sense that these are historical accounts, right? These are eyewitness accounts. And that's where C.S. Lewis was going with this. Now, it's very fashionable today to say that the gospel is not written by eyewitnesses. You probably have heard this. Matthew didn't write Matthew, Mark didn't write Mark, on and on and on. And the criteria for that are not very good. Now, it is true, we don't have the names, the earliest manuscripts, the names attached to those gospels. But there is one very important thing to consider, and that is, first of all, that the names usually were attached to documents. The author's names were attached either on the outside or on a tag. Sometimes those got lost. But something else that's even more important is when you look at ancient documents, when you look at the Gospels, the early church didn't argue about who wrote them. Okay, so they're not really arguing that Matthew didn't write Matthew and somebody else wrote it instead, or that Luke really didn't write Luke. They knew who wrote them, and tradition is passed down, and it's unanimous on that. We know who wrote the Gospels, and they weren't necessarily written by the superstars, right? Matthew, very important guy. Luke, traveling companion of Paul. Mark, kind of a lesser figure. Why would you say that some guy who is kind of like a second or third string guy wrote this gospel, one of the 4 authorized biographies of Jesus, right? So you got a lot of questions about this. And people want to try to diminish the credibility of the Gospels or diminish the credibility of their reliability, and it doesn't quite work, right? You can kind of do an end run around that kind of stuff. It doesn't quite work for us. Well, we're going to look at Mary here and pull out some things that we want to mention. First of all, we find ways to doubt. Okay, we find ways to doubt. Maybe we could say we find ways to miss signs or miss things. Okay, so when you look at Mary and you look at the disciples, one of the things that you frequently see with them is they're often missing some of the stuff that Jesus says. All right, so Jesus goes and he says, I am, I am divine, basically. And they, don't seem to quite get that. Jesus does some fantastic miracle, calming the Sea of Galilee. What manner of man is this, that even the winds and the waves obey him? Maybe he's not just a regular Joe, right? Maybe that's kind of what he's maybe getting across with this. But you see that in a lot of what Jesus says, the disciples miss some of the things that he's trying to tell them about himself, about his mission. He talks about he has to go to Jerusalem to die. They don't want that to happen. Peter actually in one place rebukes Jesus. No, we can't have this, man. And then Jesus has to rebuke him for in return fire. But when we look at Mary, she is missing some signs. Okay. Now, I'm not picking on Mary because the disciples spent a lot more time, I think, with Jesus, and they missed a lot more stuff, right? Now, sometimes we're kind of hard on the disciples, right? Man, Jesus said he was this guy. He does all these miracles. He teaches like nobody else teaches. I mean, how could they miss all this stuff? Well, it's we have hindsight, right? It's really easy when you look back with hindsight, and it's like, oh yeah, there's all the stuff you should have done, right? Well, when you're in the moment, maybe it's not that easy, right? And we say that for the disciples, and we can say that for Mary as well. But in John chapter 20, Simon Peter comes in and he sees the linen cloths lying there, the face cloth, which had been on Jesus' head. It's folded up in a place by itself. Again, one of those weird little details. Why is it there? There's no reason for it. It doesn't actually move the story along. It doesn't contribute anything. But what it does tell you is that somebody saw this. This is what was really there. This is what really happened, right? There's a missing body, and the grave clothes are folded up. The other disciple who'd reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to their homes. Now Mary stays there, and when she sees the tomb, she is dismayed. All right, and so she is. I've got one. Thank you. I've got like my own little water bottle collection. Thank you guys. But in a way, it's very natural, right? And so you look at human beings. We have a tendency to do this. Sometimes it's psychological, right? So if you have somebody with OCD who, and I don't mean just that you're kind of a neat freak or, you've got maybe some things that you like a certain way. I mean genuine obsessive compulsive disorder, right? You take somebody who leaves the house, they're driving down the road. Oh, did I turn the oven off? Right? Well, did you use the oven this morning? No, I didn't. But I got to make sure it's off. Right? And another example. You drive down the road. Actual example I heard of. I took a class in abnormal psychology one time, so we studied a little bit about this. And one example. It's a guy, he's driving down the road. He kind of hits a bump in the road, as you sometimes do. And he's driving down the road, and he says, I think I hit somebody. I think I hit a body. And he's thinking back, and no, that can't be right. I know that I didn't. I looked in the rearview mirror. There's nobody there. But he keeps driving down the road mile after mile, and it gets worse and worse. I think I did it. I think I hit a button. So he has to turn around and drive miles back to go inspect this place to make sure that he didn't do it. Right? So sometimes psychologically we do this, where we kind of fool ourselves, or we're not quite sure. We're convinced of something that's maybe not the truth. And so that's sometimes the case. Sometimes you can do this, even if you don't have any kind of condition, depending on how you view the evidence, right? So perfect example that, so it's sort of a supernatural fictional example, but I think it kind of gets the point across. Ebenezer Scrooge, all right? So sometimes you have people who say, if you just show me God, right? If you just show me God, I'll believe. Show me evidence that meets my threshold, and I will believe. You'll get a convert right here. And for anybody who says that, I say, you are not telling me the truth. I could give you all the evidence in the world within the realm of human possibility, and I'm pretty sure you're not going to be convinced, right? And so Ebenezer Scrooge is the guy that I use as the example of this, because if you see one of the movies, right? I grew up with the George C. Scott version, right? Because that guy's really grouchy, right? Well, he played Patton, so I guess that kind of fits. But Jacob Marley shows up, his old partner. He's already died. No, he's a ghost, and he comes in. He's rattling these chains, and Scrooge eventually says, "I don't believe you. I don't believe that you're what you say you are. You're just a blot of mustard or a bit of underdone potato." He says there's more of gravy than of the grave about you. You're just an indigestion manifesting itself as a vision of my old partner. And so Jacob Marley then goes and says, well, okay, we'll see about this, right? You're going to get 3 spirits tonight. But that spirit of Ebenezer Scrooge is alive and well. And so I've got a YouTube channel. And I did a YouTube short, just 60 seconds. I did a YouTube short on are atheists as rational and open to evidence as they often claim? And all I did was I was on the camera for maybe just a few seconds. I said, is atheism
always rational. And then all I did from that point to the end of the video was play clips of very famous atheists who said nothing could convince them to become a Christian. That's all they said. So one's Richard Dawkins. You may know this guy. He's an English fellow. He's written a number of books. He was being interviewed by another atheist. He said, I've always paid lip service to this. I've always paid lip service to the idea that you should follow the evidence wherever it goes, but I can't think of anything that will convince me to be a Christian. Nothing. There's another fellow who's a couple of videos of his that I played, and he was asked by interviewers, let's say the stars realign and say, this is Jesus, believe in me, Peter. His name is Peter. Interestingly enough, we'll talk about another Peter later. But believe in me, Peter. He says, nope, I would assume that I've gone insane. A miraculous revelation could come down and he would say, nope, I've gone mad. There was another video that I couldn't find that I wanted to include, was an Old Testament scholar. And she's very famous in England. And she was interviewed on a YouTube channel, and she said, I'm an atheist. I've always been an atheist. I always will be an atheist. And for all three of these people, what I wanted to say is, okay, so you've just told me that you are an irrational person, because there are some kinds of evidence that you have already said, I will not listen to that. I've already decided Christianity's off the table, and you can say nothing to me to convince me otherwise. The planets, the stars could align in the sky and write a message from the hand of the Almighty Himself, and I will automatically assume that I've gone crazy. That is not objective, right? And I guess not surprisingly, that is also my least liked video that I've ever made. And all it was atheists saying, there's no way you'll ever convince me. I don't care, nitty nitty boo boo, right? And so that's basically what it was. But with Mary here, we see Mary, and at first, right, so she's missing some signs. Jesus has said, I've got to die. I'm going to come back, destroy this temple. 3 days, I'm going to build it back up again. And what Mary it misses, right? So Jesus comes up, and there is, she thinks he's a gardener, right? She sees these angels, and she thinks that they're just regular guys. This is pretty strange, right? So Mary is laser focused. They've taken my Jesus. They've taken his body, right? Where is he? Just tell me where he is. Just tell me where he is, and then I'll make sure that he gets taken care of, right? Usually when people are in the presence of angels or the divine in the Bible, we'll bring this back up later on. When people are in the presence of the divine, they are absolutely dumbstruck. They're absolutely terrified because of the experience of this. Mary, she's laser focused. Like that doesn't impact her at all to see that, oh, here's these angels just hanging out in this tomb, or here's Jesus, and he's a dead man. He's not supposed to be here, right? He's not supposed to be upright. She's focused, right? And so she misses some of these details, in spite of the fact that Jesus has already said, this is what's got to happen, okay? So 1 John 2:2 says, he is the propitiation for our sins, not only for ours only, but also for the sins of the world. Jesus was not shy about talking about this. He says, I am the good shepherd, John chapter 10. I am the good shepherd. Good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. Matthew 17, verses 22 to 23. Jesus says, the Son of Man is about to be delivered into the hands of men, and will kill him, and he will be raised on the third day. And they are greatly distressed because of it. All right, so Jesus is clear, but it hasn't quite set in yet
Mary and for the disciples. All right. Now, one thing we do want to point out with Mary, though, is just how different Jesus is, and this is going to be kind of like a running theme for us today as well. Jesus is different. He's not your typical religious leader, right? Your typical religious leader just doesn't get up out of a tomb one day, right? We got the tombs of all the other guys. Jesus is the one that's empty, and so you've got this guy who's different. For Mary is an outsider. Okay? Mary is an outsider. And so we're going to talk about this particularly because God's grace is impartial. Okay, so Mary is someone who's kind of on the outside of things. And if you look at Jesus' ministry, those are the people that he immediately went to. Right? So if you're starting a brand new religious movement, what do? Right? You get your celebrity endorsements, right? You want to get connected to socially important people, right? Maybe politically important people. You want to get your PR staff going and start that thing spinning. What Jesus did is he went straight to the people who were some of the least desirable in society, right? People who were crippled, people who were disabled, people who were sick, people who were sort of on the bottom of the social ladder. Those are the people that he went to. And Mary is one of those people. So here's this woman. Well, first of all, that's a strike against her in that culture, right? She's a woman. Women are sort of treated like second-class citizens. They're not, they're not viewed as being very intelligent, maybe only half as intelligent as a man. They're viewed as being very untrustworthy, generally speaking, and so you keep them indoors all the time. A woman's place was indoors. You didn't go out unless you were accompanied by a male relative, something like that. And so that's one mark against her, right? And you've got the fact that she may have been poor. Well, that immediately puts her on the bottom of the socioeconomic totem pole. And then you got the fact that she was inhabited by 7 demons at some point. And, I don't really have to tell you guys about the stigma that goes along with somebody who has some mental health issues, right? That's still a huge problem in our culture today. If you have some mental health concerns, that guy, that guy's crazy. Stuff like that is what people say. And so Mary has all these strikes against her, but Jesus treats her as someone who is very, very important because she's about as far on the outside as you can get. But what Jesus does is he goes to the outsiders and he brings them in and he makes them insiders. And the guys who are insiders, well, he sort of ignores them or he goes after them or, criticizes them. But he goes to people who are on the margins and on the fringes, and those are the people that he likes to bring in. And those are the people that he likes to minister to. Not everybody has that kind of heart. We like to minister to people who are like us. We like to minister in the cases where it's really easy. We don't like to go to do prison ministry. We don't like to go down and help out the homeless, right? Those, man, you got to have a heart for that. Hey, that's what Jesus had. And if we're supposed to be like Jesus, you guys know what 2 + 2 equals, right? So Jesus, he could have done, right? What he could have done is he could have resurrected and first shown himself to his disciples. Hey guys, I'm back, right? The original Arnold Schwarzenegger. He could have shown himself to the religious authorities. See guys, I told you so, right? He could have shown himself to any number of. How about Caiaphas? How about Pilate? Right, scare them out of their pants. So what does he do? The first person, it seems, that he appears to is Mary. And so Mary is one of those cases where she gets to see Jesus. And social stigmas don't apply, right? Jesus does this a lot with other people. Now, that's not a big surprise,
because in Acts chapter 10, verses 34 and 35, Peter says, "Truly I understand that God shows no partiality, but in every nation, anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him." And then Paul, Romans 2:11, says, "For God shows no partiality." All right, so, in the life of Jesus and the teachings of the New Testament, we see that God does not favor the wealthy because they're wealthy. And for us as Christians, we don't discriminate against the poor just because the poor is made in the image of God. And you get that. You get that in the ministry of Jesus. So there are other folks who meet with Jesus in the New Testament. But women often are the privileged ones in Jesus' ministry. So one good contrast that you can get is John chapters 3 and 4. Okay, so you go to John chapters 3 and 4, and it is the encounter with Nicodemus and then the encounter with the Samaritan woman. And when he talks with Nicodemus, he's pretty tough on that guy, right? So here's Nicodemus, and he's talking with him. "Hey, man, you got to be born again." He's like, "Well, how's that going to work? Can somebody be born a second time?" And Jesus says, "You're a teacher in Israel and you don't know about this stuff? Come on, Nicodemus." This is like the Bryant paraphrase version, all right? "Don't play dumb with me. I thought you knew better than this." And then you go one chapter over, and you've got this Samaritan woman. So she's a woman, so already one strike against her. She's a Samaritan, strike two. Number three, she's drawing water during one of the hottest parts of the day. So she's probably a social outcast. That means she's probably an immoral person. So 3 strikes against her. And what does Jesus do? He talks to her. And it's weird for her because she's like, somebody like you shouldn't be talking to somebody like me. And Jesus just talks to her. It shocks her, and the disciples come back, and it shocks them, right? They're shocked to see that he's talking to this lady. But what she does is very different from Nicodemus. So with Nicodemus, Jesus kind of hammers that guy, right? You should know better than this, bro. Then you go to the Samaritan woman, and basically Jesus turns her into the first missionary. Because immediately what she does, she leaves his presence, and then she goes to talk to a Samaritan village. And then they all come out, and she says, you guys, you have to see this. There's this guy out here. He told me everything I ever did. Is this the Messiah we've been looking for? Because the Samaritans were looking for him too, right? Not just the Jews. Samaritans were also. And immediately all these people start coming out to go see who this guy is. And what you see, though, is the woman says, "He told me all I ever did." Well, in the text, what we know is he brings up the fact that she's shacking up with some guy. But Jesus had a way of being winsome. And so he could talk to her even about her sin and do it in a way that made her excited to know who he was. And made her so excited that she tried to get other people excited to know who he was. Okay? This is the kind of thing that Jesus does. And so it's not really a great surprise that Mary is going to be this one that gets this privilege of getting to see Jesus after his resurrection. Now, the last thing we'll mention here is she held on to him. All right, so this is a curious little note. Jesus says basically, "Mary, stop clinging to me." Right? And it seems to be something physical. Okay? She's somehow holding, clinging, hugging, don't quite know. The text isn't super specific. It's also one of the most difficult scenes to try to interpret in the Gospels because we don't know exactly what's going on here. And what seems to be the case is it's not just that Jesus is holy, like Mount Sinai in the Old Testament, where you don't touch the mountain or else you get stoned. It's a person or it's an animal, doesn't matter. Anything touches the mountain gets stoned. I don't think that's it, right? And I don't think that it's just the touching. right? Because in Matthew 28, verse 9, it talks about how she grabs onto his feet. And he doesn't rebuke her for that. He just says, hey, I got a message. You need to go ahead and go tell everybody. Okay? So it's not like, hey, this is weird. Get off of me. I think it's that there's something that's different about Jesus. There's something that's different about him now, and there's a little bit of a difference in how people relate to him now. Right? Now that he's the resurrected Lord. And so it's not, this is, I don't like this is strange. There's going to be kind of a new way of interacting with me now. And so that's not a big surprise, right? Jesus' resurrection is something that people were looking forward. Jesus was certainly looking forward to and trying to get his disciples to look forward to it. They didn't quite do such a great job until after the fact, but it is something that is absolutely indispensable for our understanding of Jesus. Okay, so in Romans 6:5, it says, "If we've been united with him in a death like his, we shall certainly be united with him in a resurrection like his." There's some way now that we associate, we identify with Jesus. And of course, one of my favorite verses, Galatians 2:20, it's no longer I, but Christ who lives in me. There's like this new kind of dual identity that we have, where it's not so much I'm in charge of everything, I'm in control, I'm taking the lead in my life. It's almost kind of like I'm sort of like the co-pilot now. And Jesus is the one driving everything. And so Paul says, it's kind of like, Jesus is the most important thing in my identity. And when somebody looks at you, and you claim to be a Christian, somebody looks at you, they should say, when you did that, I think I saw Jesus. When you interact with somebody the way that you did, when you operate the way that you do, when you behave the way that you do, I imagine that I see Jesus. Right? Colossians 3, verses 1-4. If you've been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things that are above, not on things that are on earth. All right? And again, Paul kind of goes on and shows this kind of close identity, this identification, connection between who we are and who Christ is. Okay, so we, in a sense, come to Jesus in a little bit of a different way. So Mary was clinging to Jesus physically, right? And I guess maybe you could understand why. She saw him die. I mean, she was one of the most faithful. The women, the Gospels point this out also. The women were some of the most faithful ones. There with Jesus all the way through to the very end, to burying him in his tomb. Mary's been a stalwart presence in the life and death and burial of Jesus. So I guess it's kind of understandable that she would kind of cling on to him. But there's a way that you and I do that. There's a way that you and I do that. And it's not physical, right? Because Jesus isn't here physically, but it is spiritual, right? So the question is, do you cling to Jesus spiritually? There are going to be a lot of people in this world, critics of Christianity, they're going to try to drive a wedge in between you and Jesus. And a lot of times it's based on, well, you guys have this code of morality. Oh, my word, goody two-shoes. Why do you do what you do? It doesn't make any sense, right? It could be trying to shame you because of something intellectual. Don't you know this Bible? This is just a bunch of myths and stories and legends and all that business. And so it could be moral, it could be intellectual. There's a lot of ways that people will try to drive a wedge in between you and your Jesus. Doubt is one of those things. right? And so that's why we're talking about everything, all three of these characters that we're going to talk about today. Doubt plays some role in the lives of all three of them, or overcoming doubt, right? So again, there are going to be those who are going to try to separate you. How closely do you cling to Jesus? So I'll leave you with that question as we wrap up our class this morning. Again, I want to tell you guys thank you. It's wonderful getting to be here. I hope I'm not too hard to understand, but I'll work on that. But it's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much. Looking forward to spending the rest of the day with you.